Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome you again for this morning's session. My name is Todd Gungle, and I'm from Oklahoma City, and I'm one of the alumni, or I'm on the Alumni Board of Directors. It gives me great pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker. Since I come from Oklahoma for our events up here, I get here on Saturday usually, and the first person I ran into was Father Julian. And I said, "Hey, Father Julian, I get to present you and introduce you for your presentation Tuesday morning." He's like, I told Tim to make sure that it's short. And the one lesson I did not learn in my time in college here was to do what Father Julian says as soon as he says to do it. So without further ado, no, I'm kidding. I'll put a little bit more here. Father Julian Peters, originally from Ohio, has been a monk of St. Meinrad for 40 years, over the course of which he has held numerous roles and responsibilities. Father Julian's presentation, Living in the Unfolding of Mystery, has two parts. Part 2 will be this afternoon at 1:15. Please join me in welcoming Father Julian Peters.
I'm going to get rid of that one. Yeah, that was even briefer than I expected. I'm proudly from the Diocese of Toledo in America, in Ohio. I always made sure that that was in my vow chart, and people still kind of make comment to that whenever that's where I come from, that's who formed me, and that's always home. Today we're talking about living the unfolding of mystery. You know, there are a lot of images that are used for life. There's the long and winding road. There's the bridge over troubled water, makes an appearance. There's the yellow brick road. And all those, and then one of my favorites is about the two roads diverged in the yellow wood. And I chose the one less traveled by. And those images are all great. And there's images about ships sailing, about voyages, about calm and rough waters. And they're all very poignant images, and they have a place, but it strikes me that they're all very linear about moving from one place to the other. It's like I picture a timeline. And yes, as my grandmother used to say, time marches on, but life isn't always just so linear, one thing after another, following in a set sequence or process. And so one of my favorite images is the image of the unfolding of mystery. Now, preemptory note, later on I'll be talking about this, but I spent a number of years as Lambert Riley's secretary and master of ceremonies, working very closely with him and his correspondence, and doing transcripts of his conferences and sitting in on things and being present. And there is the image that we become our parents. I find myself throwing out quotes every once in a while, as he is wont to do, those who are acquainted with him, throwing out quotes about Saint so-and-so says this one says that, this one. And over the last number of years, I find myself doing that a bit more, and I think, oh my God, I'm becoming Lambert. There are worse things to become, for sure. But I remember him saying, it was on the day of his abbatial blessing, that Cardinal Newman, and Lambert loves Cardinal Newman says that when a preacher dies and all his notes are collected, there's probably only going to be about 5 themes that he's ever preached on in some different way, form, or another. Well, the unfolding of mystery has become one of my themes, one of my go-to themes. Because I like the unfolding of mystery because it allows for, it's not just about a linear process, but it's about the cycles of life, and about how the seasons of life, how things come around and move on, but then come around again, and we revisit, and then yes, there's forward movement, but doubles back and twists and turns. It's not always so neat and orderly as much as recovering OCD, type A OCDs like me would like it to be. It's not that simple all the time. So to talk about mystery, we're very formed through media, through stories, through novels. That a mystery is a whodunit. It's a story, something to be figured out, and in the end, the big questions are all resolved. Who did it? Why? What happened? And we see that in all different kinds of forms, from Dateline, news, programs, to our favorite movies, to stories, all that kind of thing. But I like to revisit an older definition of mystery, and that is that about which there is always more to be learned, always more to be discovered. We talk about the mystery of faith. We talk about the mystery of God, and we know that this side of eternity, there is no resolution of all the answers. We keep looking and exploring, yes, faith seeking understanding, but it doesn't get all put together until we cross that threshold of eternity. And so I think the image of the unfolding of mystery is poignant, that as we go through life, there's an element of figuring out, looking back on where we've been, that kind of informs where we are, and gives maybe a little direction, a hope, a wish, a prayer for where we want to be going. I spent 2 years in Indianapolis as the interim administrator of the cathedral, director of liturgy. And one Sunday I was preaching eloquently, I thought, in the Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul, and I talked about St. Augustine says we live our lives forward, but we only understand them backward. And so that wove into the thing, and I'm standing after Mass, standing in the back by the font and reading up, saying hello to people. And a gentleman comes up to me and says, well, that was nice, Father, but Augustine didn't say that. Kierkegaard did. I thought, oh, okay, well, thank you, I said, but if St. Augustine didn't say it, he should have. So Kierkegaard's, that quote is that, we live our lives forward, but we only come to understanding by looking backward. That process of remembering, of reflecting, of revisiting, of telling story, that getting in touch with where we come from, where I've been, can give me some insight in how I got into this now, how I got here, and now what? Where do we go from here? Michael Casey is a Trappist from Australia, has a wonderful book that was referred to me. We had, I like to say a few years ago, which means it was probably about 20. Sister Genevieve Glenn was giving our community retreat. It's the first time the monks of St. Meinrad had someone other than a monk, let alone a woman, a sister, give the community retreat. She's a liturgical scholar, great fun. She's from the St. Walburg's Abbey out in Colorado. And she was the type, talking, we could sign up for little appointments, and so I signed up for a little private chat with her, and I went in and I said, what have you to do with me, Genevieve Glenn? I know who you are. And she just laughed, because it was one of those things I felt like she was reading my soul during the retreat conferences. And she said, I've got a book for you, fully human, fully divine, an interactive Christology. And I went, oh. Because systematics, Christology, not my thing. My class, we used to say we had no idea what Father Coleman was saying, but we could listen to him say it all day long. And so she said, no, it's not like that. It's not a hippie book. And it's reflections based on the gospel, I think, of Matthew, but that Michael Casey has written. And in one place he says, there is no means of verifying a particular choice that is guaranteed to be the right one. Such infallibility is the prerogative of hindsight. Faced with multiple options, all we can do is make a judgment on the available evidence and act on that. I kind of distill that to you do the best you can with what you got and move on. God gets us where he wants us, whether it's by our machinations or anyone else's. And so, there are choices that are made along the way and the way things unfold. And so I think, reunion, recollection is a time to stop and do a little bit of that remembering, especially in this place. And, some of the pieces and the people that have been part of our lives that sometimes maybe they've taken a step into some shadow of memory, some of them, but how they have played a role in getting me to where I am, who I am, what I'm doing now. As I said, I was born and raised in Toledo, grew up in Blessed Sacrament Parish, and went to St. Francis de Sales High School. And, I'd known from early on that I wanted to be a priest from 5 years old. And so everything I did was always geared to that. And that was my trajectory. I was a precocious child. And if it weren't for the Catholic school, my sister and I probably wouldn't have been socialized, because we grew up on a block of widows and elderly couples and childless couples. We were the only kids on the block. And so when it came time going through high school, the oblates were, now I look back, very subtly, and I commend them, trying to interest me in their community as they knew that I was interested in priesthood. And so they would invite me to the Wednesday evening community mass, to play guitar and have dinner with the community. And it was all nice and subtle recruitment. But I thought, no, running a boys' high school, that's not where I want my life to be. That's what I knew of religious life. I want to be a priest in the Diocese of Toledo in America, like the guys I knew growing up, who were the associates of my parish, remembering Jim Hoffman as the associate, Bob Wilhelm and Tom Gorman, a variety of personalities. So I had my sights set on them. And then it came time for me to look toward college. And it was between the Josephinum and St. Meinrad. And there was, and I'm, like I said, I was even then very type A OCD, trying to make lists and decide which one was going to be the best and everything. I kept getting drawn back to St. Meinrad. And little quotes that I got along the way were Pascal, the heart has reasons which reason does not know. And so I was kept getting drawn back to St. Meinrad. Couldn't articulate it necessarily, what all it was, but just that sense, this is where I'm supposed to be. Committed to being in the diocese. I was teaching a part of a CCD group over at Ferdinand, and after class one Wednesday evening, we're sitting in the rectory, and Kenny Grayler, who was the pastor at the time, looked at me and said, "Hey, Peters, are you going to be a monk?" And at that point I said, "No." "Why?" And he said, "Well, you look like one." 75 pounds and a full head of hair ago, I don't know. But I remember that, and it's kind of like, oh, what do you say? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, thanks, I think. But that was one of those things that started, I look back now and I see God starting to poke around and poke, direct, guide in different directions. A group of us, some of you may remember, we had the Emmaus house out across the valley, and there were a group of us that went out there for a weekend, and one of the monks came out to have mass for us, and the reading for that Saturday in ordinary time was from the Book of Wisdom. Follow the ways of your heart, the vision of your eyes. And of course, then it goes on, and you'll be judged accordingly, but that's later. Follow the ways of your heart. So it's still, the heart has reasons which reason does not know. Follow the ways of your heart, the vision of your eyes. People making these strides. Well, it got to the point where like, well, maybe I want to try this monastery thing. And so I applied after my junior year, and I was accepted. And people were saying, oh, always knew you'd do it. Classmates, peers, always knew you were going to do that. Well, I'm glad. I wish somebody would have told me. So I came to St. Meinrad originally saying I would never join a religious community. 41 years later, never say never when you're dealing with God. And I look back, what got me to the monastery, it wasn't just high and lofty ideal things, but it was, these little pieces, people, feedback, making comments, situations that presented themselves. So I get in the monastery, and I'll be professed 40 years on Sunday. I don't know how that happened, but and I've started getting, even as a novice and junior, a variety of assignments. When I die, people are going to look at my obituary and say he couldn't hold a steady job. Because every number of years, I've had a change in appointments. Never asked for any of them. One time I asked to get out of one. I was a junior. Brother David Petrie was the assistant novice junior master, and he had me driving the mail truck for Brother Flavian's vacation time around the hill. The big white panel truck that went downtown to the post office, picked up the mail, drove it up here, delivered boxes of returned catalogs to the Abbey Press, hauling this stuff all over. And I went to Brother David and I said, Brother David, this really isn't my thing. I really don't like doing this and everything. And we were standing by the coffee machine in the calefactory, and he looked me in the eye and he said, well, brother, sometimes we all have to do things we don't want to do. At the time, he was dying with terminal liver cancer. What do you say to that? But that was a key, that's one of those key moments, just a little exchange that I look back, that has formed me in my perspective toward obedience, toward work, toward a lot of things. Again, remembering those people who have played a part and continue to be present in my life through seemingly little exchanges. Now that pertains to me in my life, my getting into the monastery, but any number of you, of what, those who are married or have been married, about how you come to meet each other. My parents were introduced on a blind date in '59, and they had 60 years together. But it's because two friends say, oh, I think I know somebody, and I know somebody, and let's see. But even in your own relationships and situations, how a seemingly little encounter at one point has led to something unexpected, unplanned. So, in the moving through the monastery and all these different assignments that I've had, that comment of Brother David is one of the things that, sometimes we all have to do things we don't want to do. Well, so when I've been approached with Father Abbot Timothy, brother, would you consider, I'd like you to think about that, which meant this is what you're going to do. But you know, of obedience is about being open to possibilities. I don't have a reason to say no. And so, yeah, we'll give it a try. And that led through, that's been a part of all my adult life in the monastery. You know, I thought, okay, I'm in the monastery, I want to grow up and teach Latin. Even though I had Lambert for Latin in a couple classes, and some of you can remember very well what that's like. And a lot like still sitting at lunch with him. You know. You know, so I was going to grow up and teach Latin. And I always thought, but I had all settled, and Abbot Timothy said, there might be something else. Oh, okay. So I wind up going off and doing the Notre Dame program in a nonprofit administration. Okay, so I'm not going to grow up and teach Latin. Then, you know, I get asked to, well, what would you think? Father Meinrad was retiring for the Alumni office, and Dan Ship said, well, what would you think about becoming Alumni director? Sure, okay. You know. Then Lambert got elected. In the community picture that day, one of the people looked like deer in the headlights. We elected who? And he asked me to be his MC and then his secretary. Totally unexpected, unanticipated, not something I was particularly interested in doing. Turned out to be one of the greatest assignments of my life, greatest blessings. And then he resigns, he retires. Justin is elected, shows up at my desk and says, how long you been doing this? Since 99. You know, I was in the secretary. I said, why? He said, another thing about giving you a little sabbatical. Oh, okay. Plan what you want. And I'm starting to dream about that, and I get a phone call from Indianapolis saying, the Archbishop wants to know if you'd be interested in covering for me for 2 years at the cathedral in the office of worship. I don't know nothing about being no parish priest. I had done weekend work, you know, bounce in, you know, say mass, hear confessions, maybe do a baptism, and then come home. And he said, it'll be okay, it'll all work. So I go off to Indianapolis for 2 years to become a parish accredited hybrid parish priest. Coming home, walking over to Noon office with Father Godfrey, who was the vice rector at that point, said, you know, we've got this new requirement for first philosophy. There's a year of Latin. Would you be willing, and Sister Claire is getting ready to retire, would you be willing to teach a section of Latin? Oh, sure. Thought I'd kiss that goodbye, you know. But again, you know, it's one of those things comes back around. Thought I'd moved on, moved past it, moved beyond it. And then, so I'm still teaching first semester Latin. Spend most of my time teaching English grammar. But the point is, you know, through all these different, and that's the condensed version, through all these things, by looking back, I can see how God was poking around and how it was a process of the mystery of my life here as a monk of St. Meinrad unfolding, peeling back. And like peeling an onion, there were sometimes you peel a layer and you got some tears. And sometimes the peeling back of a layer is sweet. But it's all part, and getting toward, you know, moving deeper and deeper into not just the mystery of who I am created in the image and likeness of God, and you know, what God calls me to be and to do, but into the very mystery of God himself, of that process of discovery of what role, where God is in my life. You know, I tell people the reasons I stay now are not many of the reasons that I entered. You know, things change. You go deeper and you understand. It's about faith seeking understanding. and peeling apart and going deeper and not being afraid to peel back the next layer, whether that's in obedience, in terms of an assignment or a circumstance of life, or just the process of personal growth and discovery, of ongoing formation of who I am, of continuing to unfold. And you peel back one layer and that answers a question, resolves an issue. Well, that presents then the next question, the next issue. And so, and that's what I'm going to talk about some this afternoon, I hope. But looking back and seeing, even in some of those weird situations where God was present, whether they were good, bad, sublime, or ridiculous moments, but where God was in that, and continuing to be confronted with the question, the very real question, do I want to keep doing this? And there have been a few over the years. Do I want to keep doing this? And people ask me, well, why did you become a monk? I said, well, if I ever really figure it out, I'll let you know. But in the meantime, I know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. That doesn't mean I haven't figured it out. I don't have the answers. But I believe this is from God. And so I can give myself over to it. The angel appears to Mary and says, oh, hello. I've got some news for you. And you are to bear a child, and son of the Most High. And she goes, huh? But she says, okay, because she was a woman of faith, didn't understand it. We could get into the discussion about Mary, did you know? But we won't. But how it was going to play out, but it's like, this is from God, so yes, and she gave herself over to it. Meanwhile, Zacharias in the temple, and the angel comes and says, I've got a message for you too. And he said, oh, come on, you've got to be, Me? Her? No, And that's when the angel says, all right, fine. Now you just go sit in the corner and be quiet until it happens. And then you'll see. It's that difference of responding, of not knowing, understanding about where it's coming from or what, but to go with it, to give oneself over to it. And to give myself over to it is different from giving in or giving up. I mean, that's the act of the will of saying, okay, taking the step of faith and let's see where this leads. This invitation to a new position, a new work, a particular situation in life. It's not getting wrapped up in why is this happening, because that's in the mind of God, whether by deliberate or permissive will. That's another conversation for another time. But that's in the mind. Why is this happening? That's not important so much as what am I going to do with it? What am I supposed to do with it? And letting that become then certainly a big part of prayer and discovery and seeking information. That faith seeking understanding. We've been hearing a lot about the sower of the seed lately. And, so many of us, we automatically, I like the principle that parables, like dreams, everybody is you in one way or another, and at the moment of life. And so, parable of the seed, and we are very often and easily, we click into being the good ground, the rocky ground, whatever, the thorns, the thistles, and what happens. But I've spent a lot of time recently reflecting on the seed, on being the seed. And yes, I know, I'm called to be a sower. Yes, yeah, that's all understood. But what does it mean for me to be a seed? And to see how sometimes I have been sown in some undesirable places and situations. You know, when I was went to the cathedral, there was one of the staff was quite clear that she did not want me to be there. She did not like me being there. And so that set up for a little bit of tension. But we worked together, and when the best thing, when I was leaving, she said, well, you know, we had our differences, but you were a good priest. But you know, that seed, I was sown into a little bit of rough ground there. Other times I've been sown, you know, we get sown into situations where we're received well. They like us, we're successful. Everything goes well, they respond, and things happen, great things happen, things grow and bloom. And other times, you know, are sown into a particular project or situation, and it kind of takes off, but then kind of settles down, withers away, loses emphasis, loses interest. But how I wound up being sown in those situations, that's in the mind of God. And saying, you know, just because I was sown into those little situations, then like, well, not much came from it, but something did. On Facebook recently, I saw a little blurb. Somewhere there was a stranger who remembers you simply because you were kind. And you know, that sowing, you know, wasn't not being sown in that situation to develop great programs, to become best buddies, to be, you know, but just for a moment. I like to refer to the wisdom of Carrie Hamilton, Carol Burnett's daughter. And in Carol Burnett's biography, she has a quote from her daughter, and it says something about that sometimes, you know, you encounter a place, you find yourself in a situation that just to give a smile or a kind word or a little act, a little gesture, and God put you there just to do that. And so, you know, that's all by giving ourselves over to the, you know, this unfolding of the mystery of the opportunities that God gives us in so many ways. And yes, the big important things, projects and programs, that's all great. But it's also in the details, in the little moments, the moments of grace, that God has sown us in that situation to be there. So, and the other thing I like about the unfolding of mystery image is because it focuses on where you are. I mean, we can reflect on where we've been, and we can wish we were somewhere, but you got to start with where you are and be based in reality with that. And that's why I like the unfolding of mystery. It's like, at this time, in this point, this place in my life, this is what I see has been happening. And this is what is happening now in the present moment. And not knowing exactly what's going to be happening next, but it's with that understanding, okay, I can do this. I can do this. I can move on. You know, I've made it through the rain. I've made it through the wind. I can step forward. And it calls for an act of faith, of giving ourselves over to that. Not just the pious platitudes and the words and slogans that we have on our Abbey Press little posters from yesteryear and things like that, but of finding the actual wisdom in them as we go along. Any of that making sense? Any reactions? Christopher?
Julian, just a question for you. When did you know along your journey that at that moment it was right? What were you, did it feel right, or what was the signal that you said, this is good?
When I figure it out, I'll let you know. I remember that, when we were juniors, coming up, we were third-year juniors, and, the big thing about making solemn vows, looking toward making solemn vows, and Father Aylred, Cody, who's my novice junior master, stopped us putting up our dishes after supper on I can't always remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but I can remember that little anecdote of 35 years ago. And he said, if you are planning to petition for solemn vows, you should get me that petition in the next 2 days. Oh, okay, well, that was an affirmation that it's like, go ahead. And so it was an affirmation that, yes, I should do this. I'm on the right track. And there have been, no great revelations, but little moments along the way of saying, yes, this is right. And why am I doing this? Because I just have this deep-seated, the heart has reasons, the wisdom, the vision of my heart, that this is where God wants me. And so, yeah. Yes, Joseph.
It's something that I really enjoyed about hearing about your own discussion of the unfolding of mystery for you is it made me think about how we all seem to really enjoy hearing about unfolding a mystery in our lives, whether it be, like you mentioned about your parents and how they connected. I was thinking back to the story about my parents connected, thinking about how we share vacation stories, thinking about how maybe it has something to do with the fact that when we share the unfolding of our own mysteries with one another, we remind one another that those mysteries are worth diving into.
Yes, and not being, and that's one thing, because the mysteries can be just as much about painful and tragic and things as much, but of not being afraid of them or trying to shut them out or exclude them, but about saying, okay, well, let's peel this back. Let's peel back a layer here. And yes, this is a layer of an onion that's bringing some tears. But still, for the sake of coming to understanding, insight. Okay, they scheduled us for an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half. I've never talked that long in my life. But that's what I want to put out for you this morning and invite you into some of that reflection about where you've been and how you've gotten to where you are. And that can mean as much local, as specifically as here at New Jerusalem 47577. And who have been, some of the people, my office up on second floor, I'm currently, my day job now is the director of the Institute for Priests and Presbyterians. And so the ongoing formation arm of the Seminary and School of Theology. My office looks out toward the cemetery. And I've seen any number of groups of people in the past day or two walking up from the cemetery. But, remembering those maybe who were here or elsewhere, but living and deceased who have been part of your story, of getting you to this point. And sometimes of being able to say, thank you, God. I didn't realize at that point kind of what role they played. And maybe it was a moment of grace, and maybe it was somebody that, I always thought he was a nasty SOB when we were in school. But there's something that I walked away from, that I took with me from that encounter, that relationship, that has helped form me, make me who I am now. And so I want to leave you with that. to enter into some of that remembering, and that's already happening, the storytelling. But, and then this afternoon, my goal is to say, okay, well, that sounds all great and everything, but how do you really, what are some little tips on how do you really live with this unfolding of mystery thing and what that brings with it? And so that's why I hope to give a little bit of reflection. And you know, I'm no great guru on this. I've been around the block a few times, here and in the community, and working with seminarians. When I was a dorm daddy in the college, with sophomores, terrible twos of college years. There's a couple of them here. But you know, so, and then working in theology as a formation dean and director of liturgy, working with the permanent deacon program. Like I said, they're going to say, can keep a job. In the alumni office, I'm one of the chaplains, commuting chaplains for the Sisters at Ferdinand. But you know, how all those things, and how, you know, having been through those pieces of my history, of looking back, the little bits of them continue to form and inform and guide who I am today, and helping me about who I want to be. I used to tell the guys when I was a formation dean in the seminary that, especially when I had my list of pet peeves and things that I thought were most important. But I said, my goal is to help you become a better priest than I ever have been or will be. And you know, similar dynamic with parents, you know, wanting more for your children than perhaps you have had or that you knew. But so how all those things have informed now why I do what I do, where I'm doing it. So I'm starting to repeat myself, so I'm going to let it go. Yeah, we'll leave it go with that. Yes?
Excuse me, I'm not quite certain I'm following the theme here, but my life is kind of like, there used to be a program on TV called Quantum Leap,
Yeah.
where Scott Bakula jumped from one episode to another. That's been my life. And every time I go through an experience, I reflect back on, why did I end up there? And there's one episode within that that is very important. I helped the individual through a transition of some sort. And it's been one after another. And as an example, I'm here with John this week because John called me up. I have an opportunity now. I had a break in my life. And John called me up and says, hey, you know, I'd really like you to come and be my guest this week. And it's events like this that I'm talking about. And it wouldn't have happened unless I had this break in my life to be available. And every time I'm available, something like that happens. I took my father, similar situation. My father was a lot older than I, of course. We went to Poland for an ordination of a cousin, a distant cousin of mine. It was wild that I was available to be there when that would happen. And it's one after another. And, you know, I don't live a hectic life. I've been married 50 years, so there's some consistency in my life. But overall, it's been interrupted by a lot of these episodes I've gone through. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that your life isn't interrupted by them, but they are woven into, you know, they are moments along the way, and woven into the fabric of your life. But yes, that's it. And looking back, and sometimes it's, you know, it's like, wow, isn't this something, how I wound up here? You know, this is great how it all, but you know, and then down the line of saying, you know, of something that comes from you encounter, you meet somebody, you form a connection, somebody you haven't seen in a long time, or, you know, then you look after the fact, and it's all because I happen to be available, he invited me to come, and there. And, you know, it's about connecting the dots, if you will, sometimes. But that's, I think that's very much part of it, of looking at, yeah, all of a sudden, how did I find, you know, I mean, like I said, 40 years on Sunday, it's like, how did that happen? Well, yes, I could go back into the chronology and see how it happened, but it's almost like, how did I get here? Because you lose track of the total picture. We become so focused on the individual pieces, but of how it is all woven together. But yeah, I might steal that. For an age-appropriate audience that would remember that show, Quantum Leap. Melanie?
I was teaching a discernment class, and we were talking about a secular book called Coincidences, which is what you keep alluding to. And one of my students said, I think we should call it consequences. And so once I started using that terminology in teaching and writing, it became much clearer for students as they were journaling to notice this was not an accident, and it's part of the journey.
Sister Madeline Sophie in 8th grade, who always said, there are no coincidences in the providence of God. And it is, and it's all about God's plan for us, and yes, and God's will, and sometimes the permissive will that God allows things, you know, that's a whole way beyond my pay grade, those kinds of conversations. But and what God specifically directs, but yes, that they're not just coincidence, and that's, you know, an important part, I think, about living by faith, of saying, oh, well, isn't that funny? Isn't that a coincidence? Well, no, but of realizing, okay, remembering that God is in charge, as much as I want to be and try to be, you know, and that's like I say, when my type A OCD recovery process isn't at its strongest, and I'm trying to make it all happen. I got to make it happen, but what was it, John the 23rd used to say, Lord, it's your world, I'm going to bed. And that's a real, I think that's a real quote attributed to John the 23rd. And another thing, you know, that's become part of my own practices is, Lord, help me remember that nothing will happen today that you and I can't handle together. And it's that whole thing about grace is cooperative. We're not just, you know, pushed out the door to say, okay, now keep well and warm fed and, you know, follow some rules and be a good member of the church and do your own thing. But about that sense of cooperative grace, and God provides. And realizing how God provides, which we don't always, and that gets into, I'm preempting some of this afternoon. Yes?
Speaking of journaling, it's a really important part of my journey. And not so long ago, I needed some perspective on where I was in my own life, and wrote a list of all the things that has happened in my life. And when I look back, I realized that there were only 2 things on a list of 3 pages that were part of the vision that I had for where I would be. Everything else was God's. Nothing in that list was mine. And to see it on paper really gave me a perspective about how much He has touched over and over and over.
Yeah. That's why I like to look at photo albums, going through, and when we were closing down my parents' house, and, you know, just uncovering lots of photos and everything, but of remembering, and especially like going through the photo album of, you know, my sister's wedding or my profession or my ordination, and seeing people who are gone, but, you know, and it's like how, oh yeah, you know, how they played a part. But yeah, half the stuff, most of the jobs I've done in my long obituary of not holding a steady job, there's only 1 or 2 things that I ever thought I would do or could do. And the majority of the list, the rest of it is things that I was presented with, invited into, and found out I could do, but it wasn't all by me. Yes?
Just reiterating or affirming what you were saying, and it kind of fits the last two. I serve as a chaplain for the Christian movement in the Diocese of Cary. And periodically we have retreats, and one of the responsibilities of the chaplain is to give a royal or a talk on the importance of grace and God's working in their lives. It was recently, after telling this story like 2 or 3 times already, that it dawned on me. I always thought that my call to priesthood was junior year of high school. In that senior year, I came down to St. Meinrad as a visit and decided with my pastor I should give it a go. And actually 50 years ago, this week in this month of August, I arrived to begin that journey. But what I discovered was, I think my call to priesthood was actually planted when I was younger, because I would tell this story about my father and I going to all night adoration on Holy Thursday, and my last name is Mishler, so the M's in my parish at 2 o'clock in the morning. And Dad and I would trot off, and there'd be a few of us in church, keeping that hour until the next group came. I think that's where my true priesthood was planted. But it didn't come to me until 40-some years later, and giving that talk more than once, that finally dawned on me that, oh, were you tapping me on the shoulder then? You never know. So what you're saying today, it rings very true for me.
Thank you. Yes?
Just for a second, I can identify everything you said, but I would call life instead of a straight road. I would work a merry-go-round. I always in my counsel ignition, I would say it's a merry-go-round. It has its up, not only merry-go-round, a roller coaster has its ups and downs, its twists and turns.
Yes. That it's not all just, you know, you could, any number of experience, examples of, the stages of grief. Well, that doesn't mean that because somebody of wisdom and insight has labeled first stage, second stage, third, that you go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 5, 2, back and forth. That, again, moving away from that I use that as an illustration that life isn't all linear. That there are the twists and turns and potholes and, yes, diversions, detours, and sometimes you get off on a detour and you wind up your backward. Well, it's happened to me because I'm not always real good about reading signs. I wound up back to where I started. And it's like, hold on, I missed something here. This looks awfully familiar, and that's because I just made a big loop. So. Okay. You came back. It's always affirming when people come back. Our help is in the name of the Lord. Amen. Now, in my Latin class, we would begin with Adjutorium Nostrum in Nomine Domini. And I know there would be some who would make the response here, but I decided not to take a chance. Okay, so this morning, like I say, the thrust in using my own story is a lot of illustration and reference about applying that image of the unfolding of mystery, of discovery, as we move through life, and especially a life of faith and vocation. And, that's all great, looking back and gaining insight. about how we got to where we are, but now what? So how do we continue to live, not just to leave that idea of unfolding a mystery, something that's strictly for reflection on the past, but actually living it out in the present moment, and to see then how it continues to move forward. And, I think some of the challenges that come with this living with the unfolding of mystery, dealing with things like ambiguity and uncertainty, questions, doubts, fears. What are we supposed to do with those? How do we live with those? How do we live out of them? How do we live through them? Again, here's a little quote from Michael Casey. One who passes through life possessed by the confidence that nothing can separate us from the love of Christ greets every new situation with a childlike expectancy that is diametric opposite of the dread and anguish that many feel in facing the future. I think the core of that is simply the call to living by faith. And it's a call to faith. And in some ways, it's to do what we've been doing. Just do what you've been doing. Another way of looking at it, it's called, that some of us are familiar with this little admonition, to believe what you read, to teach what you believe, and to practice what you teach. And maybe that's with words, but maybe it's in quality and manner of life. Romans, that for those who love God, all things work for the good. And I like to put the codicil on there, even the absolutely crappy stuff, even the tragedies, even, the good, the sublime, the ridiculous, but for those who love God. But it's about staying anchored in God. And it's that call to faith, that trusting that somehow this is of God. Yes, it's influenced. Yes, there are weeds growing in the wheat. And there are the evil angels who are coming, scattering, sowing dissent and everything. But of keeping that overarching scope, that picture, that this is of God. We are about God. We're about God. We're about holy things. That's one of the things I always said when I was teaching liturgy. Liturgy is about God. It's about holy things, but it's done by people, and that messes everything up. We bring our stuff to it. But it's that stance of faith. And, to believe what you read, believing is itself a process that has to be nurtured and cultivated and practiced. One of the things I like to do when I do retreats, especially for permanent deacons and wives, is show the movie Big Fish, if you're familiar with that. Because it's a story about what it means to believe, coming to believe. And that, yes, not everything, accepting everything is absolutely factually correct and pinpoint true, but to believe, to take that in, to appropriate it, and make it part of your own story. Michael Casey again says, in this life, everything exists in a state of mixity. Good and evil, truth and falsehood, birth and death, progression and regression. Well, we've heard that before. To everything there is a season. A time to live, a time to die, a time to laugh, a time to cry, a time to build, a time to tear down. We don't live with either or, but both and in so many aspects of life. And to face that kind of square head on, it's not always what we like, what we want, what we would prefer, but as it says, it is what it is. In the past couple years, my sister and I have been dealing with our parents going through dementia process, disease. Dad's free of it now, but mom's still going through, and one of our expressions has really become, it is what it is. There's no changing it. We want it to be different. We would like very much for it to be different. We hate this. It's awful. But it is what it is. So what are we going to do with it? How do we live with it in the moment? How do we, to make the best of it? For both for her sake and for ours. How do we make that work? And again, I find, being a little self-referent here, some more self-referent, but it's finding out that, okay, for those who love God, this is a S storm, but it'll work out. My co-patron, I've adopted my co-patron, Julian of Norwich. All will be well. All will be well. All manner of things will be well. Yes, she's my co-patron. My patron is not Julian the Apostate. Which is, on the evening of our vows, somebody went over to Abbot Gabriel and told them our names, and they told my name, and he said, so, he was an apostate. No, my patron was 7th century Archbishop of Toledo, Spain. And I stumbled on that name literally, a week before turning in names. I stumbled across it in Butler's Lives of the Saints, and I put it on the list, and that's what Abbot Timothy circled with his green marker and said, Es nomen tibi. But I digress. So, but it's an opportunity, it's being that grounded in faith. It comes back to believe what we read, teach what we believe, practice what we teach. For those of us who are in positions our roles in life are to either preach or to teach, whether that's by word or by example, in whatever our situations might be. We can be really good about handing it on to other people and being with other people in their stuff, but when it comes to me, well, that's different. That's a different story. We'll talk about that. No, it's about me here and now, and let's talk about it. And to bring that, to apply that to ourselves. There's the question. Well, so there's ambiguity and uncertainty. I don't know what's ahead. I don't know what's in store. Well. Nobody does, and those who say that they do can't. It's in the mind of God. And so, and not to be just glib about that, but well, God knows. Yes, that's the truth. God knows. I don't. So I do the best I can with what I got in the given moment, with the information that I have, with the understanding that I have, with the faith that I have, and Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Realizing that allowing that to become part of the realistic prayer when it's challenged, especially when things are challenging for ourselves. And it's not just the people, parishioners, students, family members, children, grandchildren, whoever it is, but when it becomes that personal reference, it's and that's scary, and then that leads to the question about, at least it scares me, what would happen if I really gave myself over to this? There are days I don't want to think about that. That is scary because it is, it's uncertain, unknowing. And I pray for the grace on some better days. It's like Augustine, Lord, make me chaste, but not yet. About what, the anxiety that comes with, what if I, give myself over to this? What if I really did all the time when I preach to others? Yeah, well, it's an ongoing project. But it comes down to, again, being grounded in faith, and that we don't do it alone. That we are, yes, we are members of a church, a family of faith. We are members of communities. We are connected to each other, and the importance of connection, and especially of making our way, of keeping up that momentum forward. Another one of my favorite movies, The Wizard of Oz. I've done a parish mission once, a couple times on that. Follow the Yellow Brick Road, the images for the journey of faith. But the thing is, whenever Dorothy starts out on her own, she's scared. She's got her little puppy, but he's scampering around. And then meeting the other characters along the way, if they're separated and caught up in their own stuff, then they get, oh God, ain't it awful. But when they link their arms, then they can make their way forward. They make progress. Yes, still through the dark woods, the danger, and through all the threats that put them on the encounter on the way. But it's because they're doing it together. And not necessarily, yes, they have their goal, their sights set on, the eternal city, but the Emerald City, they're not headed for Rome. Although there are just as many characters, I digress. But they know where they want to go, but it's a matter of how are we going to get there. And so the important thing is that they keep moving, they keep going together. And yes, there are threats and dangers along the way, but they also encountered, the poppies. This nice field, and it's everything sunny, and let's just hunker down here for a little bit and take a little bit of rest. Well, they're not getting any further by just hunkering down and staying where they are. I once heard the expression, which I've stole and used over and over, complacency is the enemy of conversion. Because even when when things are going nice, like don't rock the boat. Things are, thank you God, everybody's healthy, the job's good, people aren't complaining, the roof's not leaking, the toilets aren't overflowing, everything's going good. Well, and just kind of, okay, well, just kind of hunker down here for a while. Well, that's nice for a time, but it's also not making any progress. It's not moving forward. It's not keeping up momentum. Yes, we need those opportunities of being able to rest and enjoy a little quiet. But somebody asked me at lunch, after Thursday, after the reunion, is it going to be quiet? Is it going to, I said, I hope so. But then again, it's going to pick up again in a few weekends. And it would be nice, it'll be nice to have a lower pace, slower paced day, and it's quieter. But then, there are things to do. We need to keep on going. And so it is with the journey of life, that to keep on going, to keep on keeping on. And that we don't do it by ourselves. Yes, we have confreres, we have community members, we have spouses, we have friends, we have children. We also have the Spirit. The gift of the Spirit that's given to us, that we don't do it alone. The Spirit which makes it possible for us to do those things that we don't think we can do, but need to do. The Spirit who strengthens and sustains us along the way. And to grab hold of that and to latch onto that. That's not just a nice, a piece for a banner. I come from a generation of banners. But again, latching onto and taking deliberately, consciously, and actively latching onto those pieces, and especially what I need now in this moment. Um, one of my, frequently I think one of the most meaningful prayers at different phases of my life is the Lord's Prayer, but it's, give us this day our daily bread. It's not what I need to feed my body today, but what's the grace I need to deal with the challenges of the day. I like to give that as a penance frequently for people in reconciliation. It's about, give us this day, what do I need, the grace I need to feed my soul? And again, because it's not all about me, it's about me and God. And I'm not in this alone. I may feel very alone in moments of isolation, in moments of doubt, in desperation. But taking that active, that conscious step of latching onto, but I'm not alone. There's the communion of saints, all those elements. And I think that's all part about living the sacramental life. Where most of us were raised, sacraments are outward signs instituted by grace to confer grace. Thank you, Aurelius Bulwer. But, well, grace for what? Grace isn't just, the treasure chest that's, piling up, but grace being the power, the presence of God in our lives to work in me, to work through me, to work with me, to work for me, and for others. I mentioned already, Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season. And so that, realizing that there are some times that things get torn down, things break down, things crumble. What might seem like the end of my world is not the end of the world, but it is, again, it's about the gaining perspective. Someone shared with me the coin of a phrase about perspective. It's when you think you're being buried. How did that go? When you think it feels like you're being buried.
If you're in a dark place and you think you've been buried, perhaps you've been planted.
Yes. I like that. If you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, perhaps you've been planted. And what happens when something is planted, then it's possible to break open. It's Paschal mystery. It's dying, it's rising, and in newness of life and bringing forth something more. It's being conscious of those things that, like I say, we pass on, we hear a lot, we tell to other people, but really letting it be part of our lives and to really soak in. Even, in times of, I think, a part of living with the unfolding of mystery is, what about, times of question? Lots of things can bring really deep questions. And doubts about, is this true? How do I hold on to? Can I continue? There was a wonderful line. Remember, there was a novel came out, John Irving novel, Prayer for Owen Meany, back in the 1980s, late 80s, maybe early 90s or something like that. And that Owen Meany was a peculiar character, but it's a novel about friendship and relationships. But he has there's a wonderful little exposition in there, one of his things about doubt. That doubt isn't not to be paralyzed by or afraid of doubt, because doubt is about asking questions and wondering and challenging, which itself means that whatever the issue is at hand is important. Because if it's not important, I'm not going to give a damn, it's going to be just dismissed. But if it's something that's got my attention, that I'm questioning, that I'm maybe doubting, And whether that's, an element of faith or whatever it might be, first of all, looking at it's a sign that this issue is important. I think that's a sign that grace is operative, of bringing that, of tapping into that awareness that yes, it looks like, everything's going to hell in a handbasket, and it really distresses me. Well, that shows me that it's important and that there's more at play there about my values and my connection, and that's a good thing. That's a grace. That's a blessing. Okay, so then what am I going to deal with? The anxiety, with the doubt, the question, and it's not to just curl up in a corner, but to step through it, to step into it, to step through it. It's though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Emphasis on walking through it. It's the Wizard of Oz. They're binding together. They make their way along the yellow brick road. They just didn't hunker down and curl up in fetal positions and stay there. But walking through the valley of the shadow of death, making it through it, not getting over it, not getting around it. And it's more than just wanting to get beyond it, but of going through it. Because it's in the encounter of going through it that we find, and maybe now, maybe later, that we find how God has been present and leading us, poking around in our lives, in getting us to something different, something more. It's about, giving ourselves over to what we profess, what we say we're about. And like I said, my understanding why I stay a monk now, the reasons I stay are not necessarily the reasons that I entered. My sense of belonging in the community now is quite different. What it means for me to belong and be a monk of St. Meinrad is different from what it was 40 years ago when I first made vows. It's not better or worse. It's different. It's informed by a lot of stuff. As one of the old confreres used to say, there's been a lot of water over the bridge and under the dam. He had a tendency to mix expressions up. But, a lot has happened since then. And so I'm a different person now than what I was. But that doesn't mean that I just chuck everything. But why? What does it mean for me to continue in this now? To continue to live this now with life as it is, with my understandings as incomplete, as faulty as they may be at times. A lot of it comes down to here's a little note. An element of that is laying aside our plans, our scripts that we write for ourselves or have been written for us, being open to revision, open to editing, open to conversion, open to growing. For Benedict, conversion is that lifelong process. And it's not just the big things, it's about getting up in the morning and saying, do I want to do this again today? And it's like, yes, and the bell's ringing and morning office at 5:30, and it's like, but there's some days, no, this is what I said I was going to be about. So there's an element about integrity, of being true to who I say that I want to be. And so, haul my scapular out of bed, and go do what I'm supposed to do. And then the element, the other thing that comes with that of being open to conversion is that element too of drawing from Benedict, but that sense of humility. And humility isn't about being a holy doormat. A lot of people think that's what humility is all about. Oh, I'm such a miserable little wretch. Well, maybe you are, but the humility is about being grounded in the humus, being grounded in the earth, being grounded in reality. It is what it is, where I am. Now, and so what do I do with it? And it's no more, no less. Yes, I'm an efficient administrator, and I can pull together. I can throw a dinner party, a part of party planning. I can, coordinate a liturgy for $28,000 of the 28,000 people in the Lucas Oil Stadium. But please don't make me go out on a playground. I was, like I said, I was never a child. I was born 30 years old. And so I know that I can. When I was at the cathedral the first Christmas, I found out about, Father always had the kids come up and sit on the steps, and do a little thing with the kids, a Christmas story, and I'm going, what? And so I thought, oh, no, that just, I don't think so. And there was a Holy Cross priest who was coming home for the holidays to visit his parents, and he had been a teacher. And so I called him and said, hey, Steve, would you be willing to do this? Sure, I'd love to, that'd be great, Day before Christmas, he calls and says, the priest I live with just got sick. I have to stay here and cover the parish. So, I did it, and they said it went well, dealing with the kids, but realizing, that's just not my thing. And for better, for worse, that's not among the gifts that God has given me. I can do it when I need what I need to do, but and there are things that I'm good at and very efficient at, and I'm glad to do. And so finding out, yes, realizing that humility is, realizing that we are imperfect and that it don't have it all put together, and humility means developing that capacity to regret, to apologize, to admit to being wrong sometimes, and that I've made my mistakes, and yes, I'm a sinner, but Jesus saves. And as for persons, so for the church, and being able to say, yep, it ain't all put together, but I'm not all put together, and none of us are all put together, but we do what we can, and it's with that reliance on God's grace and mercy. So one of my other themes is simply that grace provides. It's about trusting in the grace of office, whether that be holy orders and ministry in the church, or the office of parent, husband and wife. It's about trusting in the grace that God gives us to do what we're supposed to be doing in the given moment. And I have a little thing that I like to close with. But before I get to that, any thoughts, questions? It sounds easy, we walk by faith, not by sight. But that whole thing about living with the unfolding of mystery, with its uncertainty, with ambiguity, with questions, without knowing what the hell's going on, and saying, okay, well, but it's not up to me to fix it or to change it necessarily, but I can I can change, I can fix, I can adapt how I am going to live meaningfully, continue to live meaningfully through this. And not just to be overcome by the waves, but to keep on going. And that's hard. Some days harder than others. And especially to practice what I preach. You know, how many times walking away, going back to the chair and saying, listen to yourself, dumb shit. It's like, did I really say that? And what the Spirit, it's like, now listen to yourself. And that can be hard. But Jesus never said it was going to be easy. You know, that's why he gave us the Spirit. Yes, Tom.
You speak about ambiguity, and I find that sometimes just embrace that ambiguity. Things aren't this or that. And that gives a little more confidence to me.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, reflecting on what you were saying, is trying to integrate that myself. It's up here, but it's not always here. Then I beat up on myself because it isn't there. I haven't internalized it.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a good place to be. I don't have the answers. You said also something about putting it in the Lord's hand, or moving, surrendering, or
Yes. Giving over to it.
term. To use those terms is what I'm doing. I like to speak of a relationship with the Lord in the passive voice. I am the object of his love. I don't surrender. God's love conquers me. So it's, I like what you're saying. I think I can agree with all of it. But, it's a different way, I guess, of integrating it and feeling comfortable with that message of unfolding. The journey is wonderful, and there are gifts along the way, and they are those challenges. So I applaud you for your wonderful conferences this
Thank
morning,
you.
this afternoon.
You know, I come from the point of I'm a control freak. So of course my perspective is going to be me giving it over, me handing it over to God, because it's still a subtle control thing. You know, I'm the one who's initiating, guiding, directing this, and so I admit that's part of my thing. That's not a good thing all the time. Looking back to the kind of what you were saying kind of triggered something. We always talk about, Jesus taught us how to love one another and what that means to love one another, to serve one another. But he also taught us how to be loved. Because, he was not always doing things for people, but he was the guest at Zacchaeus' house, at Simon's house. Martha, you're worried about many things, but he didn't tell her to sit down and stop fixing supper. He allowed himself, the women of faith who tended to their needs, he allowed himself to be tended to. So I think that's kind of the flip side about Jesus taught us how to love, but also how to be loved. One time I was in a conversation with one of the older sisters at Ferdinand, and she was just, getting old, and I don't like this, and blah, 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 blah. And people always wanting to do things, asking me if I want help, and, and I'm not saying, no, I can do it, I'm still fine, I can do it myself. And I said, and this is one of those listen to yourself moment, I said, well, did you ever think that by refusing their help, you're denying them an opportunity for grace, of doing a good deed? Oh, I never thought of it that way. Well, maybe you should. And it's not about the doing, but being able to receive. And maybe that's part of that living with the unfolding of mystery. That's one of the big things on my learning. You know, I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. Serious, hard 2. I'm going to help you whether you want to be helped or not, type thing. But it's that learning to let people help me and to participate. Even go so far as, you know, I work for God. I work for the church. I work for St. Meinrad. But I don't always let God into what I'm doing. I've got that framework, yes, I'm doing it for God, but I'm not always letting God into the moment of being with me in what I'm doing. And that's not something I'm proud of, to say, well, you know, I work for God, but I don't let God into my work. And that just ain't right. Something about that ain't right. But of being coming to an awareness of that, and when I start paying a little bit of attention to that, give us this day our daily, Lord God, give me the grace I need to do what I have to do today, whatever that might be, and that it's not just about me. And trusting in the power of grace. God's grace provides. Which is the title of this little prayer poem that I wrote for my sister back in 2004 when she was having a very difficult time and somebody very close to her, a friend, had died. I offer this for your reflection, and then I do have copies if anyone's interested in taking it with you later. Successes and joys, projects complete, plans carried out, things gone right, blessings abound, God's grace provides. Life's disappointments, dreams unfulfilled, hopes unrealized, chaos of feelings, aching hearts, God's grace provides. Questions arise. Doubt hovers near, strength subsides, resolve grows weak, the going gets tough. God's grace provides. Families and friends, soulmates, sisters and brothers, all for a time. The length of days varies, but lasting forever. God's grace provides. Do not be afraid. Walk through the darkness, sail through the storm, travel on in hope, move forward in faith. God's grace provides. Yesterdays of memory, tomorrows of imagining, have been and yet will be. Todays live now, all will be well. God's grace provides. So, I offer some scattered thoughts, rambling musings for your reflection, your consideration. Thank you.